Amazing revelation. Women over 75 must stop walking. Discover this transformative secret for Senra. Margaret's heart raced with frustration as she read the headline in the glossy magazine, her familiar grip tightening on the edge of her kitchen table. The colorful image of vibrant young women laughing in the sun only deepened her sense of isolation. At 76, her daily walks were her lifeline, sweet respite from a world that spun faster than she could keep pace. Each step along her sun-dappled neighborhood felt like reclaiming her independence, a defiant reminder of the vitality bubbling just beneath her skin. But now, the words echoed in her head. Stop walking? Wasn't movement supposed to be the key to aging gracefully? Pain flashed through her wrist, a reminder of her unexpected fall. The hospital visit felt like betrayal, a place where the air was thick with worry and whispered fears. Each protective word from her devoted daughter Laura landed heavily, as if each syllable was a chain binding her to a life she never wanted to relinquish. It was a double-edged sword. She appreciated their love, but in their worry, she felt reduced to a fragile relic, one that might shatter at a moment's notice. With resentful clarity, she recognized the distance growing between them. Laura's eyes held a depth of anxiety that made Margaret want to shield her from the very thing that felt liberating, her own independence. It twisted in her stomach. Did her daughter forget that she was more than just a caregiver, a comforting figure? Sinking into the chair by her rose-filled window, Margaret's mind buzzed with the weight of expectations, each thought a reminder of her looming isolation. Would chasing her passions, like that long-buried desire to paint the beauty around her, push Laura further away? Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. Margaret paced the length of her small kitchen, heart pounding harder with every step. Memories flickered like film reels, the laughter shared with Laura, the heartfelt conversations, the light bittersweetness of life. But with every pulse, the unresolved tension grew. Uncertainty gnawed at her. Could she really push forward without unraveling the threads of her family? With Laura questioning her strength, her belief in what it means to be alive faded like the sun behind dusk. And then, as if summoned by her inner turmoil, her estranged sister reappeared, filled with a storm of stories and regret that pressed on Margaret's already frayed heart. Could she embrace this unexpected twist and weave it into a future she had nearly lost sight of? Or would pursuing a flicker of hope, tethered to unfulfilled dreams, obliterate the bond she desperately tried to mend with her daughter? As she brushed her fingers over the canvas, waiting to breathe life into the blank space, the shadow of doubt whispered louder between the paint and her aching heart. To reclaim her life, would she risk tearing apart the family she loved? As the brush hovered, Margaret felt the overwhelming weight of her silent question loom heavy in the air. What would her choice cost her? The morning light spilled through Margaret's kitchen window, illuminating brushstrokes on her canvas that remained untouched. She had finally set up her painting materials, but the blank surface seemed to taunt her. What was the point of creating if her heart was burdened with fear and doubt? Picking up her brush again, she hesitated, allowing her mind to wander. Images of her past danced before her, her vibrant younger self, filled with dreams and drive. Painting had been her solace, but life had pulled her in different directions with responsibilities, and now uncertainty pressed her down like a weight she could barely lift. What if painting could serve as her guide, illuminating her path forward? Or would it magnify the distance between her and Laura? Scribbling thoughts into her journal, she felt their weight linger. I am more than a caretaker. I am a creator. Her fingers ached to unleash color on the canvas, yet a voice within whispered of failure and regret. It was time for clarity. In a sudden burst of motivation, she decided to embrace this unsettling crossroads. Maybe the answer didn't lie in the choice between her art and family, but in finding a balance, a way to nurture herself without losing what mattered. What if she invited Laura to join her in this journey, not as a spectator, but as a collaborator? With a determined breath, Margaret stood up and grabbed her phone, hesitating as she contemplated the words she would use. "Laura, can we set a time to create together?" Simple, direct. Her spirit soared just considering it. But what if she misjudged the tone? The possibility of rejection stung her heart. Memories of their last conversation flashed in her mind, the edginess that had colored their last few exchanges. Why had she allowed fear to dictate her actions? Wasn't this the time to be brave? With a newfound resolve, she pressed send, the message floating into the digital ether. Now it was out of her hands. Her heart pounded in her chest, an unsettling mix of exhilaration and anxiety. What if Laura laughed off the suggestion or, worse, declined? But the potential for a moment of connection ignited a flicker of optimism. As she gazed out the window, the once monotonous view transformed into an evocative landscape, every shadow and hue bursting with stories waiting to be told. Painting had always been a language of its own, offering her a means to express the very emotions tangled in her heart. She needed this outlet more than she realized, not just for herself, but as a bridge to her daughter. Margaret returned to her canvas, her fingers tingling with anticipation. Perhaps this was not just about painting, but about reclaiming the narrative of her life, redefining her role beyond just mother or sister. If she took this leap, maybe Laura could begin to understand that her artistic endeavors formed the foundation of the vibrant person she still was. Just as she dipped her brush into vibrant colors, her phone buzzed, breaking the silence of her creative space. It vibrated against the table, a sudden reminder that her carefully laid plans hung in the balance. A message from Laura flashed on the screen. "Sure, Mom. Let's try it. When?" Margaret's breath hitched. The door had cracked open, offering a chance at connection. What awaited her on the other side? Acceptance or disappointment? The uncertainty loomed over her, an invitation beckoning her further. As she took the plunge, dabbing the canvas with hues of sky and hope, she realized the stakes were higher than ever. Not just for herself, or even for Laura, but for the unraveling of their fragile bond. The thought hung in the air, excitement tempered with trepidation. What lay ahead would take courage and vulnerability, pushing her beyond her fears. But would she be able to navigate this turbulent course without losing herself in the process? Just then, her heart raced again, this time not from fear, but from the thrilling prospect of tomorrow. Margaret's brush continued to dance across the canvas as a new question stirred inside her. Would this journey into creativity lead to deeper understanding with Laura, or would it reveal a chasm too wide to bridge? As the colors swirled on Margaret's canvas, her heart raced with anticipation. The message from Laura pulsed with potential, a promise of shared creativity that could mend the distance that had grown between them. Would the act of painting together be a balm for both their hearts? The canvas began to mirror the tumult of her emotions, vibrant yet chaotic, much like her journey into the unknown territory of bonding with her daughter. Over the coming days, Margaret felt a shift. The anxiety that had once gripped her gradually transformed into a refreshing blend of hope and curiosity. Painting became a poignant reminder that she wasn't merely a caretaker, she was an artist, a beacon of expression and a pursuit of her essence. She prepared for their first session together, not just by gathering supplies, but by mentally and emotionally readying herself for the complexity of their relationship. On the scheduled day, Margaret sensed the magnitude of the moment. She carefully arranged her studio, ensuring everything felt inviting, a warm, sunlit space filled with brushes, colors, and blank canvases eager to be transformed. She considered how this environment could initiate a conversation not just about art, but about vulnerability and shared experiences. When Laura arrived, she seemed tentative, her eyes flitting around the room, absorbing the setup. Margaret felt a twinge of apprehension. It was now or never. Would Laura dismiss the space created specifically for them? Or would she recognize the beauty in reclaiming not just their relationship, but also her mother's dreams? "Hey, Mom," Laura said, her voice tentative. "I wasn't sure what we'd do." "Just paint whatever comes to mind," Margaret replied, the softness in her tone belied by her racing heart. She began demonstrating how to mix colors, deliberately inviting Laura to blend her own aspirations into their canvas. Their initial strokes were cautious, both of them unsure of where to lead their creative collaboration. The atmosphere, however, began to shift as laughter bubbled over shared mistakes, more paint on hands than on the canvas, and chaotic splashes igniting the room with playful energy. In those fleeting moments of joy, Margaret felt warmth spread within her, the shadows of doubt beginning to dissipate. As Laura grew bolder with her choices, blending unexpected colors, Margaret's heart swelled with pride. This was new territory. It dawned on her that this act of creation wasn't just about painting. It was a language that allowed them to express unspoken thoughts and emotions. Could this truly become a pathway to understanding each other better? But as the enthusiasm built, Margaret felt a flicker of her old insecurities. What if Laura's passion for art only magnified Margaret's own feelings of inadequacy? What if her daughter discovered more about herself than Margaret could confront within herself? "Mom, look," Laura exclaimed, gesturing at her section of the canvas. "What do you think? It feels freeing." It struck Margaret how Laura could articulate her feelings through the painting. Her own breath caught as she tried to manage a response that wouldn't stifle that joy. Instead of keeping her doubts contained, she leaned into the moment. "It's beautiful. You're using color to reflect how you feel. It's impressive." Underneath the surface, a deeper fear clawed at her. What if this newfound connection revealed a gap in their understanding? Would Laura's artistic prowess highlight Margaret's own struggles instead of bridging the distance? With each stroke of the brush, a challenge presented itself, accepting that the bond she sought with Laura might be messy. Could she embrace the imperfections of this relationship? Could she nurture not only her own creative spirit, but also encourage her daughter's blossoming identity? Margaret chose to focus on the colors they created together, the shared laughter and tentative exchanges. It was time to confront the fears resting in her chest, to embrace discomfort instead of evading it. The art they made together represented far more than pigment on canvas. It symbolized a restart. They both needed this reckoning with their narratives, one that would ask them to stand on the precipice of vulnerability. As they painted late into the afternoon, Margaret stole a glance at Laura, who savored the colors that floated from her brush. Tomorrow held the promise of another session. But deep within her, a whisper echoed, a question that sent shivers down her spine. How much longer could she keep her own fears at bay before they forced their way to the surface, demanding to be confronted? The morning light filtered through the studio windows, casting a golden hue on the unfinished canvas that bore witness to their first artistic endeavor together. Margaret stood before it, her hands resting on her hips, a mix of elation and fear coursing through her. The laughter from yesterday echoed in her mind, but lingering doubts still clouded her vision. Once again, she had a chance to explore the bounds of her relationship with Laura, and yet she felt a familiar knot tighten in her stomach. Could she truly sustain this openness? What if the beauty of their shared experience began to crack under the weight of unaddressed concerns? As she set out their materials for the day, she forced herself to confront the ticking clock of her emotions. "Hey, Mom," Laura called out, already plucking colors from the table. "I was thinking we could start by painting whatever came to mind again. I really liked just letting go of expectations yesterday. What about you?" Her daughter's enthusiasm was infectious, yet Margaret found herself hesitating, the pressure of the moment resting heavily upon her. "I think we should explore something deeper today, if you're up for it," she said, as the words fell from her lips like stones in a pond, small yet rippling with implications. Laura's brows furrowed, and for a moment the buoyancy dissipated. "What do you mean? Like what?" "It's about more than colors and shapes. I think painting can be about expressing feelings you hold." The weight of her sentence hung between them, an invitation to peel back layers for the first time. Laura tilted her head, her expression shifting from skepticism to intrigue. "Okay, but what if it gets messy?" "What?" "That may be exactly what we need," Margaret replied, feeling the truth resonate within her. This wasn't just about paint. It was about uncovering the layers beneath their awkward interactions, the years that had built walls between them. As they began, Margaret set her brush to work, allowing herself to feel the weight of her thoughts. She painted a landscape, one marked by dark clouds at the horizon, while Laura, unafraid of daunting themes, created a burst of sunshine to contrast it. With each stroke of paint, Margaret grappled with her emotions, the grief, the nostalgia, and the relentless fear that had intertwined in the fabric of her being. "Mom, are you painting how you feel right now?" Laura asked, her intense gaze fixed on Margaret's canvas. Margaret paused, confronted with Laura's innocent yet piercing question. "I suppose I am." There was a moment of silence as the realization settled over them. "I think I'm scared," Laura admitted, the vulnerability in her voice palpable. "I always thought you had it all together, but maybe it's good we can be messy together." A soft smile broke through Margaret's worry. "It is good. We can be real with one another." In that moment, Margaret recognized a burgeoning solidarity, not only in their creative endeavors, but also in their struggles. Together, they shared their thoughts. Painting became their dialogue, an exploration of uncharted emotions. Each brushstroke drew them closer to understanding. But as the colors intertwined, a darker fear emerged in Margaret. What if this depth exposed fissures she couldn't heal? Was this path toward vulnerability leading to inevitable heartbreak? The studio transformed into a sanctuary of expression, but an invisible wall rose within her, fueled by a growing realization. Margaret understood that they were not simply mothers and daughters anymore. They were two women navigating their frailties, unwilling to retreat into silence. Could this fragile truce withstand the truths lurking just beneath the paint-splattered surface? Just as the intensity of their connection reached a new height, the door creaked open and a figure entered, a familiar face that sent shockwaves through Margaret's heart. Their art session's sacred bubble was about to be challenged. "Mom, is everything okay?" Laura asked, sensing her mother's emerging tension. The moment hung heavy in the air. The past was about to revisit her in unexpected ways. What would this confrontation mean for their delicate progress? Margaret's heart raced as she turned to the door, the unexpected presence casting a cloud over the vibrant atmosphere they'd created. It was Rebecca, her sister, who had arrived unannounced, bringing with her a history that Margaret had tried to neatly box away. The years since their last encounter had felt long and convoluted, filled with unresolved issues that lingered like the paint still drying on their canvas. "Rebecca," she managed, her voice catching slightly. She felt both a rush of affection and anxiety, a complicated tangle of emotions that left her momentarily speechless. Laura shifted uncomfortably next to her, eyeing the awkwardness that danced between the three of them. "I thought I'd swing by," Rebecca said, her tone too casual, almost feigned. A flicker of guilt crossed Margaret's mind. Had she been so absorbed in her efforts to connect with Laura that she neglected the importance of engaging with her own sister? As Rebecca stepped further into the studio, the atmosphere shifted. The bright colors of their painting seemed to dull under the weight of awkward familiarity. Laura, sensing the palpable tension, took a cautious step away, as if to provide space for a conversation Margaret was now desperate to avoid, yet could not turn away from. "Can we talk?" Rebecca questioned, her eyes scanning the studio for signs of what had transpired between Laura and Margaret. There was an unspoken understanding, a challenge flickering in her gaze. Margaret hesitated, grappling with the implications of this sudden engagement. Both sisters knew the past was a stormy sea, but it was one she felt unprepared to navigate today. She studied her sister's face, noting the lines of tension and the hint of defiance that had become so familiar. "Now? Here?" she exclaimed, her voice edging towards defensiveness. She glanced at Laura, who appeared frozen, caught between wanting to shield her mother and the curiosity that this family drama had awakened. "Yes, here. I've been thinking about us, about all those years," Rebecca replied, her tone slightly firmer. "We can't just keep pretending everything's fine." This call to authenticity did not sit well with Margaret. How could she embrace the vulnerability they had been creating in the studio, only to have it threatened by past wounds? She felt the walls around her heart tightening as she weighed the potential repercussions. Confronting the past would risk shattering the delicate balance she and Laura had begun to cultivate, yet part of her knew she had to face these buried concerns. "Laura, why don't you—" Margaret started, wanting to send her daughter out of the room to preserve the intimacy of their budding rapport. But Laura interjected, looking resolute. "No, Mom. I want to stay. I think we should all be here together." As the words left Laura's mouth, Margaret felt a mix of hope and dread. Laura was stepping up, pushing against generations of silence that had often separated them. Perhaps this moment was not merely a confrontation between sisters, but also an opportunity for all three of them to begin unraveling years of miscommunication and misunderstanding. "Okay, let's talk," Margaret finally said, her voice steadier than she felt. She straightened her back, resolved. As the words passed through her, she realized that the act of simply being present was itself an act of defiance against the fear of revealing her true self. Yet, deep down, a whirlwind of uncertainty brewed. Could they truly heal through this confrontation? Would old scars reopen, threatening the fragile thread that tied her and Laura together? All three stood at the edge of confrontation and revelation, and just as Margaret prepared to navigate this emotionally charged moment, the uncharted waters of family dynamics loomed before her. What might surface from deep within their collective history remained unknown, but for the first time, Margaret felt an urge to dive in. The air thickened with anticipation. What truths would emerge from the depths? And would Margaret have the courage to face her fears? The conversation hung in the air, pregnant with unspoken histories and unaddressed grievances. Margaret felt a pang of anxiety as she locked eyes with Rebecca. The turbulence of their shared past threatened to engulf her, but she recognized the urgency in this moment. "Let's start from where we left off," Rebecca suggested, her voice steadying as she took a seat on a nearby stool. "I want to understand why we drifted apart." The tension in her positioning seemed intentional. She radiated a need for clarity, but it felt like a challenge to Margaret's own stability. As Margaret prepared to respond, she felt a slow rise of anger bubbling beneath her vulnerability. "You think I wanted us to drift apart?" she shot back defensively, but the words came out sharper than intended. Laura's eyes widened, and she shifted uncomfortably. The desire to explain herself warred with the instinct to shield Laura from the raw pain that lingered. It was a habit too long entrenched, to protect her child from the messiness of family. The irony of it all enveloped her. Here was Rebecca, knocking on their door in a moment of potential reconciliation, while Margaret sought to maintain the fragile peace she had built with Laura. "Fine, let's talk," Margaret said again, softer now. "But it needs to be honest, not just rehashing old arguments." She took a deep breath, her heart racing. The walls inside her began to unsettle, a prelude to the sorrow she had boxed into neat compartments over the years. Rebecca nodded, but Margaret could see the storm brewing beneath her sister's surface. "I felt abandoned when you moved on. You thought I was just fine, but I wasn't. Mom had her issues, and you were gone." The accusation struck Margaret like a punch, and she wrestled with the lump of guilt that swelled inside her throat. "I didn't know. I was trying to build a life after I left home. It wasn't about you." Margaret was surprised at the heat of her own voice, unsure if strength or fear propelled her words. A long pause settled in the studio, the fluttering of brushstrokes replaced by silence. Margaret's gaze faltered as she caught Laura's reflection in the smudged mirror. "There's a pattern here, and it's not just the two of you," Laura said, her quiet resolve surprising both women. "We can't undo the past, but we can talk about how it affects us now." Margaret smiled, a flicker of pride mingling with unease. Although her instinct was to protect, Laura's willingness to confront this together echoed the path Margaret had hoped to carve with her daughter. "You're right," she agreed, grateful for her daughter's emerging strength. "What do we want moving forward?" Rebecca asked, and suddenly the question hung like a beacon amidst the haze of blame. Margaret sensed an opportunity, a flicker of possibility for genuine connection rather than the cyclical pain that had kept them apart. Yet, what would it take to forge a new way forward? The heaviness of their shared past began to manifest as the air in the room thickened with anticipation. Margaret realized this conversation might force her to confront her own reluctance to forgive and let go, not only of others, but of herself. "Maybe we can start with what we wish we could have said before," she offered tentatively. "What do you need from me?" The moment felt charged with potential, but with it came the lingering uncertainty. Could this really be the beginning of a new chapter? As Rebecca opened her mouth, ready to respond, an unexpected knock echoed through the studio. The sound drew all three women's focus to the door, sending a shockwave of distraction through them. What new development would intrude upon this critical moment of vulnerability? Margaret's heart raced again, not from unresolved family dynamics, but from a newfound realization that change was demanding their attention. How were they to handle whatever awaited beyond the threshold? Would it strengthen their resolve or disrupt the fragile truce they were beginning to forge? Margaret's breath caught, the knock reverberating through the fragile web of their reconciliation. Time felt suspended as the three women exchanged glances, each one caught in their own tumult of emotions. The door remained an inscrutable barrier, symbolizing both a distraction and a potential shift. Could whatever lay beyond represent the first step away from the mess they had created, or would it tear apart the fledgling piece they had begun weaving? As another knock echoed louder this time, Margaret felt her instincts surging. The thought of deflecting Rebecca's next statement gnawed at her. She didn't want to lose momentum in this pivotal moment. "Do we really want to open that door?" she asked, exploring the irony. How the very act of avoiding confrontation had pushed them to this tentative space. Her voice trembled, betraying the facade she attempted to maintain. Laura inhaled deeply, her own discomfort evident. "We can't keep avoiding things that need to be confronted. If that knock is significant, we should face it together." Her conviction resonated within Margaret, awakening a determination which had long lain dormant beneath years of protective instincts. With a deep breath, Margaret turned her attention back to Rebecca, who sat silently processing situations. The tension in the air mingled with unspoken questions, inviting Margaret to embrace vulnerability. "What do you truly want to say?" she urged Rebecca, returning to the essence of their conversation. Rebecca met her gaze, a flicker of resolve igniting her eyes. "I want to be seen as my own person, not just as someone who was left behind," she began, her voice gathering strength with each confession. "You assumed I was okay, but I was fighting to find myself without you. You think my pain was about you leaving, but it was more than that. It was me trying to find a way to exist in a world that didn't include you." Margaret's heart sank. It wasn't just about hurt feelings or missed birthdays. It was identity, the fundamental desire to be heard and acknowledged. She took in Rebecca's words, feeling the gravity of recognition settle in. How was she so blinded by her own narrative that she had overlooked her sister's struggles? Laura's presence loomed large, as if urging her mother to shift from an inward focus. "Listen to her, Mom. This is your chance to really understand," Laura interjected gently, breaking through Margaret's encircling thoughts. In that moment, a window opened, illuminating a different facet of their shared history, one marred by misunderstanding, yet brimming with the potential for reconciliation. Margaret's instinct to shield Laura wavered as her protective urge morphed into fierce advocacy for truth. The fear of exposing raw wounds transformed into a recognition that healing could emerge only by facing them. "I'm sorry, Rebecca," she said finally, her throat tight with emotion. "I didn't realize. I can't undo the past, but I would like to understand how I can support you now." The sincerity in her tone bridged the gap, creating a connection amidst the rubble. Rebecca's expression shifted. An unwilling but undeniable softness entered her features, hinting at the prospect of new beginnings. "Maybe we can start with honesty, and from there—" Her voice trailed off, seemingly unsure of the future. Another knock at the door reverberated, disrupting the soft emerging hope. Tension returned, pressing against them. Would this interruption complicate their renewed resolve? Or could they harness its energy to push through the final barriers that had long kept them trapped? Margaret stood up slowly, steeling herself for whatever awaited beyond the threshold. "Let's find out together," she declared, her voice firm despite the fear swirling within her. The door loomed larger now, a gateway into unknown territory. Would this moment lead to the revelations they needed, or would it unravel the fragile bonds they were starting to repair? With her hand poised on the handle, Margaret questioned everything they had begun to build. Would the truth they sought be waiting outside? Margaret hesitated for just a moment, her hand gripping the doorknob tightly. The air around her felt electric, charged with a mixture of fear and anticipation. Whatever waited beyond the door threatened to redefine the fragile understanding they were building, a risk that could either plunge them into chaos or escort them into a new reality. She exchanged glances with Laura and Rebecca, both women now focal points of her resolve. Deep down, she knew that confronting whatever lay beyond was an essential next step. This fundamental moment required action, not just for her, but for her daughter's peace and Rebecca's identity. It was about growth and stepping out of an old narrative that had long dictated their lives. With a strengthening breath, she twisted the knob and swung the door open. Outside, the hallway was dimly lit, shrouded in shadow as if it, too, held its breath in anticipation. A tall figure stood silhouetted against the light, their features obscured. The air thickened, and Margaret felt her pulse quicken. This stranger held potential answers, revelations that could either fuel their reclamation or intensify their fracture. "Who?" she started, but the figure stepped into the light, revealing a familiar face, her estranged sister, Claire. Margaret's gut twisted. Claire, the one family member she had failed to reconcile with, the one whose absence had molded much of her sorrow and regret. While they had never openly acknowledged their differences, that silence had weighed heavily, the dips and rises of both resentment and longing pervasive throughout the years. "Margaret," Claire said, her tone a blend of caution and weariness. It was the tone of someone who had been through her own battles, but whose scars mirrored Margaret's. "I've been trying to reach you." Laura stepped forward, her eyes darting between the two sisters, caught in the gravity of the moment. "This isn't just about you anymore, Claire. We're all trying to heal, to connect," she asserted, a fierce protector even in her youth. The tension hung like a dark cloud, unspoken emotions spilling out in a fervent rush. Margaret studied Claire's face, the tightening lines and subtle furrows revealing pain and perhaps familiarity, a reflection of her own life's burdens. "What do you want?" Margaret asked, the question escaping her lips with more bravado than she felt. The fear was suffocating, but the need for clarity drove her forward. "I came to apologize," Claire began, moving past the bravado. "I styled myself as the independent one, but I was just as lost without you. I mistook strength for solitude." Her voice cracked, unveiling raw truths that resonated with Margaret's own realizations. Margaret found her eyes flaring under the burdens of vulnerability. The emotional walls she had built to protect herself were beginning to crumble, and with them, her defenses against Claire's revelations. The thoughts raced through her mind. Maybe the connection she shared with Laura and Rebecca could expand to include Claire. This was an opportunity, but confronting the reality of rekindling this relationship also unearthed anxieties. Who was to say that Claire wouldn't turn out to be another painful thorn in her side? They were bound by history, each thread woven with an equal measure of love and grief. But could she trust that the strands could be reformed into something valuable, not a noose? "In your absence, I lost myself," Claire continued, her sincerity wrapping around Margaret's heart, begging her to unlock the door to understanding that had always remained shut. What did it mean to confront unresolved threads? Could opening up to Claire provide the clarity they all needed, or would it only unravel the hard-won trust she had started to rebuild? With the uncertainty heavy in the air, another wave of realization cascaded over her. Rekindling relationships required immense courage, but it also pricked at the scars that had long been hidden. As she prepared to respond, the weight of her unspoken fears mixed with newfound resolve, Margaret felt a shifting in her core. Could she really become the person who embraced complexity rather than shunned it? The stakes were set high, clarity was rendered vital. Moving forward meant dismantling the walls she had once fought to keep intact, exposing her vulnerabilities and leaning into a queasy openness. But in that very moment, just as she steeled herself for an answer, she noticed a flicker of doubt in Claire's eyes, the same doubt she'd felt all along. Before anything could settle, Margaret had one last decision to make. "Can we even begin again?" she murmured into the thick air, her heart pounding as she awaited Claire's response, teetering on the cliff of unknown futures, where clarity and chaos might collide. Margaret held her breath, the words hanging between them like a fragile glass ornament, waiting to shatter. She yearned for a response, a revelation that could either bind them in shared understanding or propel her back into the confines of her carefully constructed solitude. Claire hesitated, her grip on the doorframe tightening, as if anchoring herself against an overwhelming tide of emotions. "I don't know, Margaret. The years have changed us both, and trust, it's a broken bridge we've been too afraid to cross." Her vulnerability resonated deeply with Margaret, intertwining their fates in unforeseen ways. The truth of Claire's statement spiraled through Margaret's mind. Trust required more than mere words. It necessitated action steeped in honesty and courage. She recalled the moments when she had felt lost, unable to differentiate between independence and the isolation that had plagued them both. If Claire was willing to confront the past, then perhaps she too could step beyond the shadows that had kept her stagnant for so long. "How can we start?" Margaret found her voice, steadying it with newfound resolve. In that moment, she wasn't just seeking clarity, she wanted to dismantle the barriers that had bred decades of hurt. "What do we need to do to move forward?" Claire's gaze softened, layers of trepidation unwrapping slowly. "We need to recognize the patterns that pushed us apart. I tried to protect myself by pushing you away, but I realize now that it only created an emptiness inside." Dark memories flickered behind Margaret's eyes, an echo of exchanges sharp with anger, words spoken in haste. Reconstructing those memories felt daunting, yet empowering in the context of this moment. She could summon that tension to foster growth rather than fear. "Maybe it starts with sharing everything we buried," Margaret said, intuition guiding her. "The hurt, the misunderstandings, the love we thought had faded. We owe ourselves the truth." The silence that followed was pregnant with potential. Claire's breaths evened out, a flicker of hope glinting in her eyes. "You're right. We need to talk about things we never addressed, what happened, how it made us feel, and what we wished for at the time. It's a lot to unpack, but maybe the weight of it has held us back for too long." Margaret nodded, her heart racing at the prospect of unveiling painful truths that lived within them. This confrontation, however uncomfortable, could birth resilience they had both craved. The path would not be easy. The jagged edges of their past might cut them as they tread into fragmented memories. Still tethered to that emotional magnetism, her thoughts scuttled to Laura and Rebecca, how this new dynamic could ripple outward towards them. The fragility of their relationship hung like a thread, but in this perceived chaos, there was a semblance of clarity. Could Claire's presence add to their healing rather than disrupt it? "Shall we sit down somewhere? Perhaps a place where we can talk openly?" Margaret proposed, extending a hand towards Claire, the gesture symbolic of inviting her back into her life fully. "Yes," Claire responded, her voice threading through the tension of the moment, determined yet uncertain. "But let's promise to be honest, even when it's hard." As they stepped together into uncharted territory, the weight of their past lingered, but Margaret felt a spark of fervent liberation expand within her. The first step was acceptance. The second was the willingness to confront the intricacies of their shared history. Could this rekindling allow them to forge a stronger bond, or would it expose festering wounds too deep to heal? As they moved toward a small cafe at the end of the hallway, Margaret's thoughts churned with both excitement and dread, knowing that the conversation ahead would demand not only truth, but a commitment to forge a new understanding free from echoes of their past. The cafe door swung open in response to her push, the bustling energy enveloping them, offering a symbolic contrast to their internal deliberations. It was a world alive with chatter and connection, yet within the sanctuary of their conversation, their histories whispered greedy and hungry. What awaited them now could reshape their lives. For all its promise, would it summon the courage to face the skeletons rattling in their emotional closets? As they settled into a quiet corner, Margaret prepared for the most challenging dialogue of her life, aware that each word exchanged could carve new paths or reinforce their original fractures. "Claire, let's lay everything out there," she whispered, anticipation rising in her throat, her heart a restless drumbeat, the urgency of reconnection thrumming louder than ever. "What do you wish you could have told me all those years ago?" Margaret took a deep breath, the atmosphere in the cafe settling around them, a stark contrast to the turmoil of emotions they had recently navigated. The warmth from the cup cradled in her hands offered a momentary comfort, but she knew that it wouldn't replace the authenticity they needed. It was time to peel back the layers and face the uncertainties head-on. Claire looked into Margaret's eyes, her own glistening with a mixture of nostalgia and pain. "I wish I could have told you how lonely I felt when you left. I thought I had to pick things up alone, and I convinced myself that distancing myself from you was the only way to cope, but it just isolated me further." With each confession, Margaret felt a knot of anguish and empathy unwinding within her, one she had overlooked for too long. She grasped at Claire's words, unpacking the layers of regret and realization woven through their years apart. "I didn't know," she said softly, the heaviness of understanding settling more comfortably on her heart. "I thought leaving would allow me to forge a better path, but what I see now is that in seeking freedom, I abandoned you in so many ways." The acknowledgement resonated, painting a history of hurt that hurt deeply, yet carried a faint glimmer of hope. "It's never too late to change the narrative," Claire replied, her voice steadier than before, sketches of their bond forging more intricate layers. Margaret nodded, recalling the constant intersection of her life with Laura's, the vital thread of maternal love that she had focused on sparing at the expense of her tie with Claire. Each moment of confrontation begged for resolution, and now was the time for courage. "I wish I could reconcile my insecurities and admit my failures as well," Margaret added, her heart thumping in her chest as she tapped into pieces of herself that had long been encased in judgment. "Being a mother made me feel strong, but I see now that I was using that as a shield, not realizing the cracks it left along the way. It wasn't fair to you or to Laura." Both women faced hard truths with clear eyes, and the vulnerability of the moment began to draw them together in unexpected ways. "I always thought you were my anchor, but I was holding on to that image of perfection in my mind." Claire choked back a sob, a mixture of regret and realization flooding through her. "I should have known we each had our battles." Their conversation unfolded like the very canvas they painted on, layers intertwining, forming deeper connections. Margaret took a step forward, illuminating her own refreshment, the growth she had marked with Laura, a rhythm emerging even now. What if we invest in each other again? We could reconnect not just as sisters, but as equals. Imagine building new memories from the fragments of our past. The scent of freshly brewed coffee mixed with the sound of laughter around them, reminders that life was happening even amid their reclaiming of lost time. Margaret's heart pulsed with the promise of something more profound, an invitation to break from old patterns and create a narrative that honored both pain and love without judgment. And what about Laura? How does she fit in this new chapter? Claire asked, a spark of curiosity igniting her stance. She inspired me to confront my fears, Margaret explained, a smile emerging despite the heaviness of their talk. Being vulnerable wasn't just about feeling exposed. It opened doors to share and embrace new facets of who we can be together. Laura helped me realize that she isn't just the daughter I care for, but a partner in this journey. A tear slid down Claire's cheek, the moments of sadness encapsulated by the familiarity of their histories. "I want that too," she said, her voice a whisper. "It's time to redefine us, not as remnants of past pain, but as sisters who still have the power to forge a bond." In that instant, Margaret felt a surge of overwhelming gratitude, not just for Claire's willingness to own her emotions, but for the life lessons captured through her journey with Laura. With every acknowledgement and every shared revelation, she could see the framework of healing stitching itself together right in front of her, the threads crossing into a tapestry of collective understanding. "Let's commit to this," Margaret proposed, her voice assertive yet tender. "It's about allowing ourselves the grace to grow, together. We can meet more often, work through what we didn't have the courage to articulate before, and support each other without reservations." Claire's eyes shone with a burgeoning resolve. "I'd like that. We can finally paint over the scars and begin again, this time intentionally." As they leaned into each other, emotions flooded over, the tension abating, the dawning recognition that this reunion was merely the beginning of their story. And within Margaret's heart, an exhilarating feeling of accomplishment ignited, sending ripples of satisfaction through every segment of her being. They had traversed through stages of discomfort, vulnerability, and ultimately, clarity. Validation circling back to radiant growth. Striking a balance among identities had freed her spirit. The warmth of the cafe faded. The world outside ceased to exist as they huddled together in newfound solidarity, buoyant thoughts materializing in the light of a remarkable transformation. Trust was revisited, boundaries explored, and with every conversation, Margaret felt the burdens of the past releasing their grasp as her heart began to beat with fervent hope. It was now clearer than ever. Connections, once frayed, could be woven anew in vibrant shades of understanding and perseverance. The whispers of yesterday could finally give way to the affirmation that the present was theirs to shape authentically. With this marked moment of reflection, Margaret understood that she hadn't just started a journey with Claire and Laura. She had unveiled a path toward profound personal achievement, embracing both the complexities they all held within and the healing love that emerged as they forged ahead together. So, don't wait even one more second. You need to subscribe immediately to the channel to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm and voice your support for these powerful journeys. Comment your reactions and theories about the ending, and share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this resolution. Only true fans of personal overcoming stories understand the importance of supporting our content through these actions.